Welcome back, everyone. In the first couple of decades after Hijrah, Muhammad and his followers waged numerous battles. When summarizing this formative period, it's common to hear the assertion, Islam was spread by the sword. But is this true? According to the primary Arabic sources themselves, perhaps surprisingly, the answer is no. To understand why, let's consider the difference between these two statements against the backdrop of the first 2 decades AH. First, consider the statement, Islam was spread by the sword. In typical usage, this entails that early Muslims waged war for religious reasons. The religion of Islam was their primary motivation. That was for the better, according to many Muslim apologists, because the religion of Islam is true and liberating. It's for the worse, according to critics, because it creates insurmountable ethical and theological problems. However, notice a very important assumption implicit in this first statement. It assumes the Islamic component from the very beginning. Presumably, we're to imagine Muhammad leading his followers, full-fledged Muslims, into battle amidst shouted quotations from the Quran, exactly as Muslims recite it today, animated by the zeal of spreading pure monotheism. The second statement, the early expansion of the Arab Empire enabled the spread of what we now know as Islam, is much more careful historically. It allows for an expanding Arab Empire apart from religious motivations, at least initially. But it also acknowledges the spread of Islam over time throughout the conquered lands. Finally, the second statement reflects what the primary Arabic sources actually say. Let's look at a case study. Muslims believe that, after Muhammad moved to Medina, he fought the Meccans who had persecuted him. This conflict continued for several years. Within this period, around 624, the Battle of Badr took place. This battle started when Muhammad heard about a high-value target in the form of a caravan loaded down with money and merchandise. They, referring to the companions who narrated the story, said that when the apostle heard about Abu Sufyan coming from Syria, he summoned the Muslims and said, "This is the Quraysh caravan containing their property. Go out to attack it. Perhaps God will give it as a prey." In his book, The Stated Motivations for the Early Islamic Expansion, Professor Ayman Ibrahim looked extensively at the most reliable Arabic sources for Muhammad's battles and collected the relevant data. These sources tell us what happened when Muhammad told his followers about his plans to attack the caravan and what motivated this offensive campaign. I've condensed Dr. Ibrahim's analysis and provided the relevant sources that he cites. First, Muhammad heard that a large caravan was coming back from Greater Syria. This caravan included about 36 men, though these numbers do vary in the sources. Second, Muhammad told his followers about the high-value heist and encouraged them to raid the caravan so they could take the property. Third, Muhammad's followers were hesitant. They did not expect one of Allah's apostles to create a war. Fourth, Muhammad insisted, citing the large amount of money in the caravan as well as the relatively small number of accompanying guards. Fifth, Abu Sufyan, the leader of the caravan, took a detour to avoid confrontation with Muhammad. Sixth, the Meccans did not want to fight Muhammad. And seventh, Muhammad told his men that Mecca was giving her precious life away to you, thereby enticing his men to battle. From these data, we can make several relevant observations. First, the Battle of Badr was not religiously motivated or defensive. Ibrahim comments, the battle cannot be viewed as a Muslim defensive war or as a war for the sake of proclaiming the Muslim faith. In the traditional accounts, there is no mention of an incursion against the Muslims by the Meccans, nor is there a reference to the soldiers proclaiming their new message to their Meccan enemies. The Medinan camp, under the leadership of Muhammad, sought victory over the Meccans who fought as an attempt to defend their possessions and lives. Second, since the putatively historical details of the battle lack religious motivation, the accounts were embellished with various supernatural flourishes. In their attempt to portray religiously driven maghazi, they, referring to the Muslim narrators, embellish details regarding the divine support granted to the believers. Some of these flourishes are quite comical, like Abu Jahl, who was murdered by 3 Muslim warriors. After that, he repeatedly emerged from his tomb only to be kicked back in. Muhammad prophesied that Abu Jahl would continue to be battered until the Day of Judgment. Third, Dr. Ibrahim notes numerous conflicts in the various narratives. According to some sources, Muhammad appears brave and certain, fighting on the front line. According to other accounts, he appears timid and unsure. Sometimes Muhammad is described as being on the sidelines, protected by a small band of warriors. When considering both the disagreements and the supernatural additions in the various accounts of the battle, it appears that the dissonance in their reports stems chiefly from their attempts to depict a religious picture of the events and what motivated them. Fourth, in addition to politics and economics, the battle was motivated by revenge. After the fighting was over, Muhammad hand-selected some important leaders from among the prisoners of war to be executed. However, Muhammad spared others. In this case, it wasn't a massacre, it was strategic. The overall portrayal suggests a tribal combat driven by political measures and economic interests, rather than faith proclamation or a preventative battle for self-defense. And of course, after the battle, there were disputes over spoils of war. And of course, Muhammad had a solution. The Prophet, in a wise decision, waited until he entered Medina to distribute the spoils. At that time, a revelation from Allah is reported to have come down, instructing that the spoils of war be given to Muhammad himself. Ibrahim notes that this revelation conspicuously has nothing about proclaiming a religion to the pagans. It's all about the spoils of war. Then he continues, this reflects clearly that the spoils of war took a higher priority over any traditionally claimed religious zeal. In Ibrahim's analysis of these battles, he sees a repeating pattern: politics, economics, revenge, but not religion. He summarizes, concerning the early raids before Badr, there is no textual evidence in the classical Muslim narrative that these expeditions aimed at converting pagans to Islam, or even preaching it to them. At Badr, the believers appeared to seek revenge on the Meccans who had expelled them from their homeland. After Badr, the believers sought the spoils of war and the ransoms paid by the Meccans. This suggests that the believers sought power and resources rather than the conversion of the Meccans to Islam. Professor Ibrahim's study exposes the motives of the battles fought during the period of 622 to 641. We've seen one example. The motives range from politics to money to revenge. Neither defensive battle nor the spreading of religion were in the picture. The absence of Islamic motivations in these early decades is conspicuous. For those who take a critical approach to early Islamic history, it's not surprising. Islam, as we know it, was a later creation, redacted anachronistically back onto this early community of believers. For traditionalists, this raises substantial problems. They have to explain why Islamic elements are lacking in these battles, contrary to the narratives of Muslim apologists and scholars. Or they can simply ignore what their own texts say and continue to claim early Muslims fought either defensively or to spread the light of Islam. But of course, when they do this, you now know that they're either ignorant or lying. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.